Three, two, one. We are live now. So, good afternoon, gentlemen. Just doing a sound check. Can you guys hear me loud and clear?
Can hear you just perfect, Farooq.
Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. So, let's get this discussion started. And before I get started, I think we can start off with a round of introductions, and then I'll talk briefly about the topic for discussion. So, like to start off with Michael, your introduction first, and then Bashir can follow.
Okay, fair enough. So my name is Michael Ball. Been in cybersecurity or information security for about 30 years. Was CISO at a couple of Canada's large insurance companies and have been helping small to medium industry for the last 5 to 6 years. The most relevant, I guess, is worked in security governance with Freedom Mobile for about a year and a half, and that's relevant to this.
Farooq disappeared. Okay, we'll continue so that Farooq can get back. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm currently the president for Biztech Professionals Association of Canada, BTPAC, which is part of ICCP. That's all about certification, education, certification, technology, and business. That part is headquartered out of Chicago. We are here, but my role in this area, this is of course not for profit and helping education, is about coming out of the Big Four as an accountant and doing auditing to Air Canada and eventually operations, moving on to Citibank, also managing operations, even IT. Then I managed third-party processing for the payment side at TDSI, which became SNS, and then became Emerges, which became Bell, and then now with TELUS, we've got the health side and all that. And then moved on to Visa, where I was originally managing operations, then risk management and security here, moved to California and became the global head of internal audit, and I was the executive vice president for risk management and security. It was during the time in Canada that actually I got started on PCI compliance that we put together. So you can either throw a dart at my picture or hope that it was a good thing. Came back and also helped Deloitte as a senior executive advisor, Grant Thornton. But all this time I had been a company doing consulting. So now we are here having worked with different companies, including like Michael mentioned, telcos, banks, World Bank, different areas, both in Canada and pretty much globally. So hopefully we can help share some insights in what challenges are there and how people need to address them, right? So,
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I think I was having some audio issues with my thing. Can you guys hear me loud and clear?
Yep, you're fine. So one thing I want to say is that this issue is not industry specific. So we're talking about the telecom industry at the moment, but it's a broad across hospitality, Marriott hotels, and banks and insurance companies and mining and
credit bureaus.
Credit bureaus, yes.
Yeah, that's true. So the bad guys don't exempt anybody, right? Basically.
No.
Yeah.
No. Wherever there's money to be found, right? So and a lot of this we were talking earlier is third-party issues, and it's much easier to attack a smaller third-party part of your supply chain than it is somebody. For instance, I would expect Rogers themselves to have a significant amount of investment in cybersecurity and controls. So to attack them directly would be a great amount of work. But if I knew who their supply chain was and could get in that way, it's an easier bid.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And one other thing there, which is also interesting, is that people also become your weakest link, right?
Yeah.
That if you have a lot of fantastic software in controls, and if people don't understand how to use them or that they must use them, you're exposed quite badly depending which side of the business you're in, because all they need to do is get into any one area and then off they go.
Right.
So,
when we talk about this triad of people, process, and technology, okay, so all of cybersecurity is people, process, and technology. And people are a weak link. Process is literally, so when we do a maturity assessment or a maturity model, we're looking mostly at their process. Process is a piece of paper. It's a document. If you don't follow the process and you don't have technology in there to enforce it, then what is the process?
You said something very important, because when even back in my old days, even the last few years, as I've looked at some of the things, what is on paper is not what is getting practiced.
No.
And they keep making changes, and based on what the paper says, exactly as you quite rightly point out, the process is very nice. It's like disaster recovery. Business resumption plan. They're sitting on some of the files at the back, but when you have to use it, you find the numbers don't necessarily add up, because the guy's number has changed. He's not even on the same person, because they don't go back to it, right? It's only when the auditor is coming in, so end of the year you're doing SOX or whatever, they're running around to get it done, and then what happens is it's not up to date, right?
Yep.
So,
well, even something as simple as network diagrams. So we go in to do assessments, and I'm going to say that 90% of the places that we go into will hand me a network diagram and say it's not up to date. It's probably 18 months out. 90% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about, that's a good example, and even I was going to use the airline example, but it would be true of telcos as well. Is that you say you're PCI compliant, everything is all hunky dory, your security controls. Now, one of the terminals at the airport doesn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's failed. So you call the mechanic, the electrician or a technician to come and repair it, or instead of two, it's going to take a little while. So he'll immediately replaces a different one because he doesn't want to hold you up, right?
Right.
He goes back. He comes back after a few hours. Next, how do you know what he put in there? That every time you keep punching, it's now been trapped, right?
Right.
So now telco is the same thing. You got modems in place. Who is to say something's not been tampered with? How do you know that? And so the inventory control, the network management becomes so important that people have been hacked in the shopping malls because they went to where their wires were coming in, right? And you just put simple devices there and you capture information. So yeah, you're right. I think you touched a very important point there.
So let's come to the subject at hand. So Michael, do you want to talk about the breach a little bit as to how the breach occurred, what went wrong, and just talk about that briefly?
Yeah, mute. There you go.
Yeah.
So what we know anyway is that a third party was working on the Rogers databases and had a copy or a replica that had relevant, personally identifiable information of Rogers clients. And so it wasn't specifically a breach of Rogers itself. It was a breach of a third party that was working on their databases that had not appropriately secured that data. Okay. So when I was with Freedom Mobile, we had a very similar incident. Actually, after I left Freedom Mobile, a third party had stood up a replica of a database to evaluate latency, and that third party got breached. And it was Shaw / Freedom Mobile clients.
Good, thank you. So I would like to come to Bashir now. So it seems that there is an inherent risk of mergers and acquisitions, right? And Bashir, you have worked for Rogers in the past. You can probably talk to it. So do you think that mergers and acquisition is the main contributor to this, or there are other factors which come into play?
I think there are quite a few factors that kick in. So, and what I'm going to talk about applies to not just all telcos, but even other people, is that when you take over an organization, you take over an existing mainframes and employees of the other people, right? They may be using completely different operating system, perhaps networks, and you have that problem. Now, we know that mergers by and large are not very successful because of the cultures of those organizations, right? And the two things I've seen happen is that we buy out a company because it's good and they do well, but then you try to change them to your way of thinking, right? And it doesn't work very well. So that's just on the top side. But now when it comes to technology, you end up with having two different teams. I know of a couple of, if you were in Air Canada, you would have seen when you were flying as to exactly who was in Air Canada staff and who was Canadian Airlines staff. Or beg your pardon, Ward Air staff, because Ward Air were very, very good at customer service. It's not that Air Canada wasn't, but you could see clearly because the other guys went above and beyond. Now that once they got this culture together, it helped, and the system was one eventually. What perhaps has not happened at Rogers is because you grow. When you grow with acquisition, you have different challenges than rather than Bell and whoever else that actually had their own growth, from whatever they'd built. So that brings a different challenge. Then you end up, in order to deal with it, you start ending up outsourcing, right? Or the other organization may have outsourced it before. So you take in a company. I remember one of the challenges they had faced, and which was public information, so we're not giving you any secrets here, is that they had announced that if you're calling any other Rogers customer, there's no charge long distance as long as the other guy's on Rogers. Problem was that you're calling Vancouver, you're coming out of a different system and you're entering a different system, so there was no way of them tracking. So now you'd get a bill and you're saying, why am I charged this long distance charges when you told me it is not because they were trying to be bad, is because this was the challenge. Then they, if you remember, they acquired Fido on the cell side, and there have been many others. So that challenge is something that every company has to deal with. Some do better job than others, but that is a challenge regardless. So that's one part, the culture. Then question is, do you bring the systems together? And many times what happens is they got so many other pressing problems, right, that it gets left behind and said, oh, it's working, fine. We'll come back to it. And like we know, when you start making exceptions, you don't go back to it, right? And then you superficially do. We've seen exceptions that become the rule. So I understand that few other companies, including they perhaps are still dealing with some of those challenges, right? So that doesn't help. And I think what Michael talked about, when you outsource, the third party gets compromised, and you can quite, legitimately in one sense claim that it was not us. But the problem is that you're the one who gave them the data to do work for you, right? So what controls did you place on that, right? And what oversight do you provide? How are you training them? Would you not agree, Michael, that just because you outsource doesn't mean you outsource responsibility, right?
Well, no, you can never outsource accountability or responsibility.
Right.
You own those.
Yeah, exactly.
And so your agreement with the third party needs to ensure that they follow your security controls. And it's your accountability to validate that. So I'm gonna bring something else up that we didn't talk about here. And Farooq, you're on mute. So this is the second breach at Rogers in the last 3 months. So in January, there was another one as well, where it wasn't PII, it wasn't personally identifiable, but what it was there was 2 GitHub repositories with code for some of Rogers' back-end stuff. And there was private keys and usernames and passwords for that code in GitHub. Now they pulled them down quickly, but literally, 30 days later or 40 days later, we have this second breach.
That's not good when you get things like that repeating. So you're right. One of the challenges I found in when we manage the third parties.
Bashir, you're on mute.
I didn't notice that. Thanks. What I was saying is one of the problems with the outsourcing that they've done, which you brought up a very good point, is that we didn't outsource. No organization outsourced because the other guys were fantastic at security. They outsourced because of cost.
Right.
Then, so that's one problem. Second problem is that did you when this is done, did they go back and make sure the contracts reflected that? Which means you can go and audit the people, review the controls that you have on paper. You go like if you're outsourced, let's say all the way to India, Philippines, or wherever far away. It's not easy to send your people in there to double check what's going on. So you have to check some things from here. So that's a little difficulty there. But regardless, what has happened is too often then the players change in between, right? Because staff to turnover is quite incredible. So when that happens, it's yet another problem because what was discussed verbally I may have had conversation with Michael saying, by the way, here's what happened. Because we have good relationship, I won't write it down, but make sure it doesn't happen. But I'm gone now. So it's nowhere on the paper because I'm worried about me taking the responsibility too. So that also happens, and it doesn't help the customer because I talk about you own your data, which means if you're giving data to somebody, you better be very careful what you're giving away and why you're giving away, and then make sure that is protected and the controls are in place and that you are doing the reviews. Not the same guy. One of the problems, Michael, from an audit standpoint, long time ago, I saw it, and even at least, is that don't send the same people in because what happens is they get so familiar with the process that they're not really truly audit because they become friends with the other guy, right? So he says, you know that we did this last time. You took a look at it and all is good. And they go, yeah, okay, they'll take a cursory look. That's not what you need. You need a guy going out there saying, I don't know anything. Show me. I want to see, right? And it starts the whole process. That's not how it's done. So there's a lot of holes plus transparency, right? Is this process transparent? Can people look at it right to the top, or are we sanitizing going up so that people at the top think all is hunky-dory because they're seeing some things which tell them, no, we're good, but we may not be good, right?
Yeah.
So
Michael, coming back to you, and of course, I just need to unmute your mic. Sorry.
No,
you're unmuted now. Okay, you're good. So my question to you is that from the third-party oversight perspective, or from a supply chain management perspective, what do you think needs to be done? I mean, there needs to be an oversight. We all understand that. But how can that oversight be made effective enough or enforced in such a way that it's effective enough?
Well, and the thing is that currently in our third-party controls agreements, we tell the third party what we would like them to do, okay? And we ask them, are you okay with this? Are you doing these things? And we take them at their word for it. I really believe that we need to enforce that and do the audit ourselves. So we're accountable for the fact that the third party is putting the due diligence and the controls in place. You know, from a contractual perspective, they're accountable for the fact that they're doing it, but we're accountable to the data.
Yeah, makes sense.
one of the point to add is that.
Okay, did we just lose Bashir? You can unmute yourself, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we just lose him?
It looks like we've lost him. He might have to come back in.
Okay, so while he's coming back, we were talking about third-party oversight and supply chain management, and I know I think I did a webcast with you a year ago or a few months ago with regards to the Capital One breach, where a developer at AWS had access to production data.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and from that perspective, I mean, it's clear that, I mean, this in this case, there was a third party who had access to production data. What can the institutions do in order to ensure that the vendors or the third party which they employ do not have access to production data? What are the best practices around that?
Well, and again, it's all we've done is we've moved the location of the data. So when it was at home, when we had the data sitting in our data centers, we had a series of controls in place, and we could monitor and understand who had access. We didn't even really do that well. Okay, so even in our own data centers, there was an awful lot of data lost, and but we had tooling and we could do monitoring. When we move that data out to the cloud, we seem to be doing less monitoring of who has access and who is doing the access. There seems to be this misconception that the cloud providers are going to secure it for us. We really need to own that data, and if it's a third-party provider, maybe we own the database and give them access to it rather than hand it over and say, here, make a replica of this.
Right. Sanitize the data, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a very key area, because you see the whole system of having scripts and a database that you can use, replicate the applications and stuff like that that you want to test, but not the data better be totally clean, otherwise you're asking for trouble. We have seen fraud, by the way, on the credit card side actually happen through the development system. So that's a very important point you're bringing up. But it actually brings in the training too, right? I mean, if people don't understand how you're supposed to test and do that, we haven't even talked about the fact that through the COVID-19 crisis and what is happening, the world is not going to go back to what it was before. This is going to be a new normal, right? How are they going to deal with these challenges we're talking about right now? When you have people working from home, your systems are going to be exposed, because it's not the time when you could image the system and say, all right, they can't touch it. Well, they will be able to touch it. Now what?
Yeah. And so one of the conversations I've had over a number of conferences recently, if you picture a Venn diagram with two circles, okay? And so both of these are Gartner Gartner statistics. So prior to COVID, 70% of employees had the ability to work from home. So not within the defense in-depth strategy that you've put in your data centers and in your offices. 70% of your employees could work from home. And now with SaaS, Office 365, Salesforce, Concur, Workday, you name it, 64% of your corporate intellectual property is also outside of that perimeter. So if you overlap those two circles, you've got a significant amount of data sitting outside your corporate perimeter that a significant portion of your employees have access to, that you are not controlling.
Right. And they have not looked at it, right? That's not been looked at at all. So the challenge, you're right. This is going to bring, so when you look at it, the question is, are they dealing with day-to-day stuff only and trying to keep the head above water, basically, to be fair to them, that they can't look at this type of things? And this is where the exposure is coming from. I had one of the guys turn and tell me, we can't afford to do this because it's going to cost us this money. Problem is they're losing a lot of money. And my point to them was, no, you cannot afford not to do it. You're already losing a lot of money. If you do this in 2 months, you'll get the money back. So why are you holding back? And that's been part of the challenge. So it's going to require a different thinking. We talk about the legacy systems and all that. And the other problem is we got legacy thinking here. That's the problem.
Well, and the legacy thinking that we have also leads to legacy architecture being built out in the cloud.
Right.
So if you look at AWS, if you look at Azure, if you look at Google, they all have the ability to provide security by design right up front. Okay, when you build a new infrastructure in any one of these providers, the controls are there, but a lot of companies insist on lift and shift, taking what they've got in their own data center and making it work in the cloud. And that's not a scalable move forward direction.
You're talking about scale now becoming bigger, basically, right? Because, and if they can't deal, I think there's also a more principle statement that says if you are indisciplined in whatever you're doing or don't have the control, just because you outsource, your problem is not going to disappear. Because the problem, as you heard, is the garbage in, garbage out. Kind of, you're indisciplined before, it's not going to change. You're still doing that. So there's a part we don't talk about. But the corporations in Canada and elsewhere suffer from is there a significant amount of duplication of data, significant, and that causes more exposures in terms of protecting it, in terms of who has access to it, and then if you're going to use AI at some point in time, guess what? You got contradictory data because you have one first draft and draft 2 and draft 3 and updated draft and draft 4, and then Farooq has updated saying Farooq's updated thing, and then date goes on top and final 1 and final 2, and I go, how is it final if it's final 1 and final 2? But they've got all this where you start from the original draft to where you end up, but they're storing all this, right? So this
multiple different systems.
Correct. And so it creates, whether it be pricing policy, whether it be the process that we're talking about, and the question is, are they dynamic? Controls are supposed to be dynamic in that you can change when something else changes, right?
Right.
And then not doing it. At least I have not seen it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question now. I think somebody just asked us a question, and the question is that can the panelists talk about the importance of the position of Chief Data Officer? In your opinion, which industries are embracing this position better than others? So your perspective on this position.
Bashir, my auditor friend.
As to how many, no, it actually, first of all, it plays a very important role, okay? Because of the fact that without data, you're going nowhere. I talked about AI just now, not knowing about this question, but AI works because there's good data, because it's your behavior pattern. Whether you're dealing with Equifax and trying to get a credit rating, what do? They look at your ability to pay people, the fact that you have this money, are you paying your bills, how are you acting, do you take 30, 60 days, whatever. For the organizations, whether it's telco or banks or whoever, that data is critical. So data governance kicks in now to see, are they doing it? To the best of my knowledge, not everybody's got a data governor, if you want to call it. Some industries have started to do that. What we used to call it the big data, right?
Mm.
And my comment always used to be, never mind about big data and small data, it's data. End of story. We're collecting more data now because there's ability to go here and ask for everything under the sun. But the problem is that you also create problem. You take a lot of data, you don't tokenize it or you don't remove it, it stays there. So yes, you do need. Now, as far as telco having a data governor, I don't recall, right? I don't think they have one, which is worrisome. The fact that somebody's got a title, and we have seen a lot of titles in banks and everywhere else, but what are they really? Are they doing the effectively data governance job that you're talking about? I'm not sure that it's widespread. There is perhaps a little bit of that getting done, but not to the extent that we are. Because if that was true, you would be having people questioning, why are you storing this data? Earlier I was talking about the fact that you download an app or flashlight on your phone, and it takes your camera and microphone. For God's sake, this is a flashlight application. Why the heck is it asking you for your files and camera and contacts and all that? So we have never questioned that. So the guy who's managing that in the company, whether it be telco or whatever, he's operating the same way as operating on his phones. So we don't turn the switch on or off. So yes, your question is very good. The job is needed. It definitely needs somebody to be doing that, and they need to take it very seriously and say, Michael's question was earlier, somebody needs to own this thing, and could be the data guy who says, okay, what do you need this data for? I own it. I want to know exactly who's touching it, why. If we did that, we wouldn't have half the problems, right?
Well, and data is the new capital, right? So
Yes.
data is what makes your company run.
Correct. I mean, look at Facebook. You don't have to look very far. Every time you touch it and you give them every information about you, they can turn elections, they can do whatever. So yes, the data is absolutely the new oil, and it's serious stuff. So when you're giving it away, better be careful as an individual. Don't give away the data. And with telcos or whoever, if you're giving them data, you better ask why are they using what is, and that's is going to require some legislation and laws to turn around and say exactly, can you be transparent? What do you do with my data? Right? We have the government. If you went to the ministry and you change your address for your licenses, right? And you want to go to another ministry, they don't have the same information. Why? That's all privacy. We can't give it to the other guy. You don't want to give it within the government, and yet you're giving away to somebody you don't know is protecting and could be anywhere in the world. How does that add up? Right? So yeah, it's needed, and they should start doing it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, good point. So since we're talking about chief data officer, we're talking about data governance, let's switch gears and let's talk about the regulators, the role of the regulators over here. So I think since we're talking about Rogers, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's the top telco in Canada, top or number one or number two, either of them. It's either Bell or either Rogers. So what role can CRTC play over here, or what's the role of the
We've lost you, Farooq.
Yeah. Repeat the question. You're frozen.
Privacy officer of the province or the federal privacy officer? And what do you think they can?
Your question is about what the legislation, CRTCs, and all of them play a role in here, right? In terms of data privacy, data governance, and making sure that it's true. We don't have the legislation here. I'm not even sure that we meet the GDPR properly. Okay, we don't, which is fairly tough rules to maintain, which is very important. And I think, given what is going on now, think about it. If you're in another country, like China was able to control the COVID-19 by making sure that your phone was telling them exactly what you're doing, where, how you were moving around. Well, that was helpful for that problem. But can you imagine in your personal life, if somebody is actually watching every second of that, would you find it acceptable? So why are these guys being allowed to collect this type of data, starting with Facebook and the other guys? So I think we need laws to protect we know recently BC changed some laws to allow data to go across, right, to between Canada and US during the COVID crisis up to July. I hate that, because when I was auditing, I found something which was really scary, that when I looked into some of the exceptions, I found out they were given 10 years ago, right? So how the heck are they still in place? It was supposed to be for 2-3 months, because we are not very good. If I recall, tax was also supposed to be temporary. Well, we are paying through our nose, right?
So one of the things that you're talking about is the difference between implicit and explicit consent, right? So in North America, save California and New York. In North America, we have implicit consent. So by filling out a form with your personal information, basically you're saying that I'm going to trust you as a company to use it to my benefit, right? Whereas explicit consent, GDPR, says, here's how I'm going to use your information. Is that okay? Before you even collect it.
We don't do that, right?
No.
We hand out the data and they use it. I mean, it takes, if you go on Google and you do search on something, there 2 minutes later, not even 2 minutes later, seconds later, you got about 10 ads for that product coming from different places, because they're working with the other guys. And I think and they're making a lot of money. I wouldn't mind if they were doing that and that money was going back into your communities. It's not, right? And then they are registered in tax havens and they don't even pay tax, right? So How is it helping any of us?
But again, so this goes back to data is the new capital, okay? And sharing of that data is a revenue stream.
Absolutely, because it's your behavior pattern, right? Absolutely, I agree with that, and I think that we need to be that legislatures, as we know that Dr. N. Kuwiken was not happy about the fact that they put this exception in from BC, and we do it with them good intent, but the unintended consequences are pretty serious. So everybody who's in this business should actually turn around and look for explicit, approvals that I am going to use it for, which comes back to transparency. That if you're going to use my data, you better talk to me and get my permission, because I own my data, not you, right? Or at worst, jointly owned, right? But you can't go do anything without getting my approval. And we're going like that to in the medical world, right? That you own. Otherwise, when you go, somebody's got your medical records, and you recall in the past where to go take another X-ray and expose yourself and the cost, because that doctor won't pass on your record to somebody else. So we can't have that type of thing. So it's got to be a system. It can only come. We don't have. I can tell you one thing: technology companies are not going to change unless the government has legislation to make them do it.
Unless there's financial teeth.
Correct. It's where you can actually, we got PIPEDA, but
Yep.
PIPEDA didn't have the teeth to go charge people.
No.
So what is the purpose of that? Any legislation, if you can't charge it, like cop can stop you for speeding and say, "Hey, bad boy, you can't do this again," and you'll do it again, because what is the consequence? We're going to stop you and waste a minute of your time or 5 minutes. They need to be able to hit them, as we are seeing with COVID crisis. Like people got frustrated, now they started handing out fines, right? So it needs to be something where companies feel pain. Don't give them a $500 or $1,000. Facebook laughed everybody in the face when they paid $5 billion fine, because it's nothing. But they make a lot of money in revenue, and the stock went up, so they made the money next day. But we need to make sure that the legislation is there.
Okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
So you just said something there. Reputation. Okay. So after a breach, the stock market goes down significantly, and we've seen this time and time again. How come within a year of a breach, those same stocks are up beyond where they were originally? Why is that?
You're asking a very good question. I have some views. I won't express them here, but I can tell you it doesn't add up, right?
Yeah. So any news is good news, right? Bad news is good news. Just getting your face in the papers.
Correct. That's absolutely
exactly.
It's marketing, right?
Yeah. See, bad publicity or publicity, it is publicity. You're making it to the headlines. You're getting some brand recognition. I mean, in some way or the other. So that happens. So I have a question for you both. So so the PIPEDA got updated 2018 November. A new version of PIPEDA came, which is like PIPEDA 2.0, which was updated on the lines of GDPR. Do you think the new PIPEDA is effective enough, especially with regards to mandatory breach reporting?
I have opinions on this. You know this.
Go ahead.
So in large industry, less than 70% of companies actually have a breach plan in place. Okay. November 2018, PIPEDA said you have to have a breach plan in place, and you have to be able to show the privacy commissioner, okay, that you have a plan in place. Less than 70% of large organizations have one in place, and less than 30% of small, medium businesses have one in place.
That speaks volumes right there. And that you can add Castle to that, right?
Right.
Because it's the same challenge. My gut feeling is that we're heading towards GDPR here. It's a matter of time. Because if we want to do business with Europe, which we do, they will not accept where we are today, right? Not for long. And so I think maybe PIPEDA 2 is a move towards that, which will be a good thing.
Right. So things like the hospitality industry. why are they not forced here in North America to follow GDPR? Because they have clientele. You know, it's there's a number of industries where the clients, because we're a global, the world is global, internet is global, and the ability to segregate my customers to just a local area doesn't make sense.
Correct. I think people should also embrace the fact that digital literacy, which we don't have, when you look at all the CRS scams that are going on, we had a block number, right? That if you register with in Ottawa with your number, that people won't be able to call you then. It'll block. Guess what happened? Those numbers actually somehow got into the hands of the people overseas. How? Because the companies themselves were involved. They said, if I make a call, I'll be in trouble. I'll outsource it to somebody who's outside the range of the law. If they call me from India or wherever else, it won't matter. And they will be outside of the... That type of thing has to stop. And it will only stop if there are 2-3 things. There are laws in place to avoid that thing happening. I give you a little example of legislation. It can't be like that. Yesterday, they were complaining about the fact that the governor in Kansas, right, said, okay, no more than 10 people, right, or 20 people, whatever it was, can get together in church or wherever. But they had 55 people. So they asked the priest, that you're going to be charged. He said, no, I won't, because there's an exemption for the choir, and the 55 people who were present were all singing, so they were all, the entire thing was a choir. So, I mean, he's right. The loophole was left there. Why was that loophole left? They could have said, okay, a choir, but no more than 10 total. Doesn't matter whether a choir or a cleaner or whoever. But they didn't do that. So was it politically done? And very good question. So I think even when it comes to telecommunication, for how many years people have been promised that, the cost will go down, this will happen, that will happen. It hasn't happened. So where's CRTC on this, right? So I think this is a very good point you're talking about. But when it comes to people that will have to be strengthened to really, and give commissioner the power to really charge people, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I have a question, just changing gears again. So Michael, do we have an idea of to how much of the data was, how many records were breached? I just read somewhere it was like small business. Do we have any information on how many records we're talking about for Rogers?
I do apologize. I don't have that information.
Okay, so so the reason why I'm asking this is that right now the dark web is putting up for sale lots of information, and this is information about mobile customers from different geographies. I mean, I know there was some information from Europe, from South Asia, which is up for sale on the dark web, and the feeling that I have is that this information, which was breached as part of the recent Rogers breach, would be up for sale on the dark web too. So I know one of the common questions which consumers will have is that, okay, what are they supposed to do? I mean, and if the consumers find out, or through the press or through CBC, that this information is up for grabs on the dark web, what should be done then? I mean,
So just like any breach, I mean, all of this information is valuable. So if you've got a first name, last name, email address, in your telco, they've got your home address, like your full home address. They most likely have your date of birth. So there's an awful lot of information there that could be used on the dark web for identity fraud, for purchasing new credit cards, all sorts of things. So,
okay.
Farooq, one of the interesting things, as Michael quite rightly pointed out, we don't know. We don't know how big the compromise was. But I only point to you, when Global Payments had their compromise, they said it was a taxi driver and it was only 10 people, and it was then went to 100 people, then it became 1,000, and eventually went into a few million, if you recall, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't know. The truth is we don't know. And that's always worrying when you know that you've been around this type of breaches and you're told one thing and slowly, steadily, and it's not that anybody's lying. It's possible that they may themselves not know how bad it was. They know about this, is what they don't know is what worrying all of us, right?
Yeah.
And that was
So I
kind
just
of my
yeah.
issue earlier, is that in January there was a breach on GitHub of a certain amount of data, and then a month later there's a second one now in Amazon Web Services. What one's next?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So just coming back to the point about what can Rogers do for those customers. So I know when the big Equifax breach happened, lots of their affected customer, which was almost half of the North American population, were offered free credit monitoring. So I think that's something which might be on the cards. Do you think that's something which Rogers would be offering to their customers?
I would imagine so. Rogers doesn't have a credit monitoring service, so they would have to go back to Equifax or one of the others. It's
Right.
kind of funny that Equifax was providing the service for a breach that they instituted, but
Exactly. I mean, think about it. They're saying it was only small business. Why would they provide credit monitoring for the other people? So that's a problem. First,
Yeah.
people will look and accept, but you're right. At the minimum, if I was one of these users, even if they think they were not compromised, change your password. And for God's sake, don't put the password of your dog and cat and your daughter and whatever. Make it a complicated password so that I know it's not easy to remember. Keep a little book at home, not on the computer. Some people are putting it on the Word document. No, write it offline and keep it securely if you can't remember. But don't keep the same password everywhere because otherwise you'll get compromised. Even people like Norton Semantic provides you a service for a Vault where you create a complicated password to log into the Vault and then it signs your different passwords. But that's number one. They should even perhaps advise Equifax and TransUnion that this has happened and can you please keep it on a watch? And it'll be Rogers or whoever is the person that actually kind of was not careful with the data, be responsible for it. And that's where the government should step in.
I typically tell my friends keep 3 separate sets of passwords.
Yeah.
So you would have your social media, you would have your banking, and you would have your corporate business.
Right.
And at minimum, like make sure that they are different.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the only, right now, I don't know. And for God's sake, don't go to crazy websites because you expose yourself, right? Keep it simple. Don't download every app on this. When I took the phone, I reset and I said, no, I only need these 3 apps.
Oh yeah, but all my friends say that game is great.
So Bashir, we have some questions, Bashir and Michael. So I think we have like about 12 minutes left. So I think let's talk about some questions. So our friend from Pakistan, Hussain Hassan Ali, he's a chief audit executive at one of the large banks in Pakistan, and he's worked for the big fours in UK also. So he has a comment / a question. He says that it is often a waste of resources to develop, publish laws unless compliance is enforced robustly. We see globally that some countries like Singapore are better disciplined at enforcing and implementing laws. What, in your opinion, is the situation in Canada, and how does that compare globally?
So let's start with Singapore because I lived there, worked there, and of course I came from UK myself, from the auditing thing. Is that you're absolutely correct. No point having laws unless you are ready to enforce it. Now that takes 2 parties. A, the government who has the laws. B, the companies that have, which means the internal audit of those organizations must have independence. That's the key. When you don't have independence, as a guy at Visa, when I was the global head of internal audit, I was not reporting. I was reporting to the chairman of the board because you need that independence to be able to call out whoever there's a problem and not be worried about that. That is not happening. If you look at internal audit here, in many companies, they're reporting to different people lower down and to CFO. Why? If I'm the CFO and I've kind of screwed up or there's a problem, you will never catch that problem because I'll kibosh it. So you need that to go above. So that's 1. 2, with that independence comes people. You make sure. One of the objectives I have always had in internal audit, you don't have anybody working there more than 2 years. That doesn't mean you're firing them. You transfer them to other areas to learn the business, right? And by doing that, you bring fresh eyes, fresh people to look at don't have the same people doing the work, because then complacency, and when you get familiar with some people and processes, you don't look beyond that. You're comfortable because we're all creatures of habit. When you get a new guy who doesn't know that, he asks questions, and that's when you start to improve. So you need, so that this is a very good question he's asked, and I had to do the same thing at Visa as well, to make sure that we have the different people auditing, and then you look at then, but the people must not be afraid of auditors, which is also the climate we have created. You go, auditors say no, you can't do this, or you write it up and people get fired. That is not good auditing. Auditor goes in to understand, to work with people and understand. The mistakes happen for 2-3 reasons. The person either did not know, education, the process were not good, they were weak, or somebody does it deliberately. If it's deliberately, it's criminal, whatever, you come down very hard on that person and make an example. If the other two, you immediately start to examine what the process needs to be fixed, the guy needs to be trained, and then you give that particular area time to fix that problem. Not like 10 years, like 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But they only get the exception if they give you a plan that says, I will fix this, here's how I'll fix it. You buy into it and you monitor that, right? Which means you got a system to back you up. And at that point in time, if the exception is not done, those people are in trouble. If they are not getting the work done, then you have to make sure you stay on top to help them out. The second part, what I had done in the internal audit, I split people in my group into two, which is that I had a group that you could call on to get advice, but they were not the people who audited you. Okay, they were part of the audit thing, but I split them up. They went there and worked with you and say, you better do it like this or like that, and you would work with you. So they were there to help you, not to find faults. They didn't pass the information to the other guys, because if they did, I would have fired them on the spot, because you wanted people to get the chance, so that when the auditors went in, they saw, and we call it, when you give a letter to somebody rather than audit report. So you give the letter to the person in charge of that I found these problems, but I'm not writing you up. I'm giving you a chance to fix it, okay, with a plan. So when they come up, that letter disappears and everybody's good. So then they are willing to bring you in. If you keep the relationship that we had in the past, that I go right up and people get fired, I would never have accepted the job. I'm a business, I'm a builder, right? So to me, that's my 2 cents, but it was a very good question indeed.
You're advertising my business, Bashir.
That's right. Any other questions there?
Good. Good. Okay, I have another, and that's a really good.
What happened, Farooq? You're there?
We need to update Farooq's home network.
That's right. He's on 312 baud modem. Okay, there we go.
Okay, did you guys hit the question? Do you want me to repeat the question?
Please
repeat.
Okay, I'll do that. Sorry. So what is the way to manage data in a colonized world where companies and states sharing data on while there is no single framework regulating all, for example, the tech giants in the US?
Right.
Go for it, Michael, and I'll tell you my question.
Well, so first of all, I think we need to look towards GDPR with explicit consent, where the individuals that we're collecting data from are actually the owners. Okay, so they have the voting authority on what happens with that data. And then as a company managing that data, we need to understand that we're simply a vessel to manage and ensure the protection of that. So again, the whole supply chain piece, everybody in the supply chain has their role to play, but is accountable to the consumer, to the individual whose data it is.
I totally agree that at the end of the day, when you sign an agreement, first of all, nobody should be allowed to put that 20-page and 50-page agreements and say click accept. It should be very simply upfront what you are signing up for, right? Number
Yep.
one. Number two, I think, as Michael says, now, are you look at there's another part I'm going to add to this, which I think when we had the monopolies and the telcos, the Bells and in US and whatever, they broke them up. They broke up Bell Canada in Canada many years ago. That's how we got TELUS and Bell and Bell Alliant and so forth. I think the time has come that you cannot have companies this big, too big to fail type thing. So then you're forced to bail them out because the damage would be intensive. They need to break them up so that you cannot have one company dictate. You got China now building their own. If you recall, Huawei said, okay, rather Google said we're not going to support them, whatever happened, and they built their own web. So which means they're going to have Africa and other countries with them. Is this how we're going to operate? If we're going to work with each other? So they need to come up and say, okay, here's the standard, but break the companies up. And I had a view. In fact, we're going to be doing a session on this, but I'll give you a little taste of that here. Is that you take that company, you break them up, and create non-profit, community-based kind of companies. Well, not companies. They are not. By the way, unless people realize or not, Toronto International Airport, or Pearson, as everybody knows, is now world-renowned. Is voted the best airport in North America and is among the top in the world. They are not owned by the government. They're owned by a not-for-profit, and they bring in a fantastic amount of profit. So if they can do it successfully, that money goes back into the community or to help make things better. We need to do the same thing with telcos so that you don't have this type of problems, because we have got to be one of the most expensive telecommunication in the world, right? Nobody pays this type of money in Europe or anywhere else. And we were promised, like Michael can talk about Freedom Mobile, and there were a lot of kind of frequencies for sale, and what happened? It was acquired by the big guys, right? That cannot be allowed. How does that happen? If the government says this is what we're going to do, then they have to stick to it, right?
Even the frequencies that were purchased by the smaller ones because they were allocated for smaller companies, those smaller companies got acquired by the big companies.
Correct. So
specifically for those spectrum.
Yeah,
absolutely. So when you talk about how do you manage the data where the country is using it, the big company is using it, and I think it's got to go back to exactly what Michael said. The individual owns the data, and you are given that data only to consummate that transaction, not on permanent basis to complete that transaction. When you're done with it, you better be deleting that information, because there's no reason for you to keep it. And that's what they're using at the moment. That is what needs to get addressed. So will they address it? That's a multi-million-dollar question.
So if we follow this round circle, so GDPR right now puts a financial value on data loss. Okay, we're not doing that here. But
No.
what if we actually said that during a data loss or during a breach, we identify who was breached and we owe them a dollar amount for that record. So not only are we being fined by the regulator, okay, but we owe a certain amount of money back to the person that actually owns the data, the consumer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But fantastic. That would really, they would actually bring all the other stuff. Even the first question about data governance and audit and all that would come in very quickly, because the minute you have pain, what I've always learned, I give you an example. At Visa, we had put in penalties for people because they were using pornographic sites and all over the place and not paying. So I got a shock when people started paying penalties because it was too lucrative. They'll pay the penalty, they'll keep doing the business, and they'll move the servers to different countries. And we realize, no, hang on. What's the intent of penalty? That's where things have gone wrong. The intent of penalty is to change your behavior.
Right.
It's not to collect the penalties. If somebody's collecting penalties, then it's not working. So right. So they need to make sure you got the rules, the education, transparency, and now I'm going to hit you pretty hard. Now, if you break the rules, there is no excuse. That's when I'll make it very painful. And we have not made it painful. Why? Because the lobby groups are very powerful. They are up in Ottawa and Washington and wherever. That's the other thing we'll have to be tackled if this is going to succeed well. To try and say, no, you can't do that. And that comes back to consumer. Always back to consumer, right?
Right.
We have time for at least one question more before we end. So the question is, for telco sector, what is the role and effectiveness of the state auditors in Canada to ensure compliance with the regulations? Probably talking about the Auditor General over here.
Very good question indeed. Because what you're identifying is the fact that if somebody doesn't, they get a piece of paper to say. So I think I can give you a couple of examples which are on PCI, but they apply the principle. I'm talking about the principle. Is that you get a piece of paper and you say you're compliant. You heard me say that nobody's really compliant. Now, so Visa can either accept and saying, yeah, I saw the piece of paper, or turn around and say, you know what, I'm coming in at random, right? Put the people at random, you walk in and they cannot stop you and say, show me you said this, let me see, right? And they don't have it because they only put it together for the QSA or for the audit, right?
I was compliant at 9:52 on Thursday the 5th.
That's correct. So the rule. So you're right. You're absolutely right. So now the key here is the rule. Legislation should be changed to say that if we come in, you're not compliant. You're not compliant. It's not a compliant at one point in time. This is not a balance sheet as at 31st December 2019. This is what, because it's 2 seconds later, it could become very different. So it has to be ongoing, and the audit itself better be dynamic. It's continuous audit. So if you're going to really fix this problem, you better start to have people who go watch regularly, not with any warning, no advance warning, to see, because as I said, the process in that binder up there is not necessarily what they're carrying out. And I've seen it too many times. So you start going, and when you do that, because they don't know when you're going to walk in, that is when people start to realize that I better, and you do it. You don't, it's like a little kid. You don't threaten a kid and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to count till 3, and you count till 2 and you see that nothing is happening. So what do you do as an adult? 2.1, 2.11, because the kid, because you don't want to go to 3. So you can't do that. You have to turn around and crack down to say that if we go in, you are going to follow it religiously. So that is a very, very good point that's been raised, that the government needs to now think about the fact that they do it for banks. OSFI does it. Why not do it have that type of regulators for this business? And I don't mean CRTC. I mean an independent people that you can't influence, right? They come in, they don't care. Their job is to review and then write it up. And they are looking at what you said you were doing versus what they found.
Okay. No, thank you. I think we are at the 1 hour mark right now. But I think, anyways, Bashir and Michael, thanks a lot for an engaging discussion. I think I learned a lot. About the telcos and about what measures they should be taking in terms of managing third party. I got to learn a lot about your opinion about how efficient should our regulators be. But thanks again. Any parting remarks from you both?
No, I would say from my side, thank you for this opportunity to actually talk to among three of us and everybody else. And if they've got questions, which they may have, because they'll sit down and then do that, and we'll do the session again to address those things specifically, right?
Yeah,
for sure. And I will share the video with you guys so you guys can properly upload that on your YouTube channel. And I think for whoever who's watching this right now, I will share the video with everybody. And I think we just got a comment from Hussain. He's saying, excellent comment, Bashir. It is critical for all regulators to put their foot down. Yeah, I think as a former internal auditor and external auditor, I am a big fan of that the regulators should deal with such violations with an iron fist. But everybody has their own opinion about this.
Right.
Okay.
But the only way it's going to work, right?
Yeah. Anyways, Michael and Bashir, thanks a lot for your time today. And I would be sharing the recording with you. And until the next time, we have our Facebook Live on another engaging topic. Chat with you later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I need to run and catch my GO train now.
In your dreams, right?
Only in my dreams. Thanks very much. Take care, Michael. Have a wonderful day,
Safe.
Farooq, and we'll chat. All the best.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you. Cheers.